How many of you had the chance to see the ritual last night, the opening ceremony? Okay, good. This is going to directly integrate with my talk. Everything from body suspension to body modification to a lot of that has colored some of the rituals we're going to see this weekend. The glass walking ritual, the work of Aesthetic Meat Front and Louise Fleischhauer, and some of this idea of transcending what we believe are the boundaries of our capability. Right? That is what the occult experience, spiritual experience, is about. That's what the alchemical state is. It's this idea of transforming us larger than the sum of our parts. We're not simply an assemblage of flesh and blood and bones and bacteria and cells. There is something that comprises this us that we have designated with a name. Right? At the same time, it's nothing and everything all at once. And so what I want to explore here is a concept I call the violent divine. This is this idea of a God you cannot worship in a temple. It's a God you worship in the streets. It's a God you worship in experience. It's a God you worship while walking on glass. It's a God you worship with books in your back. And it's a God you worship in times of stress and trauma. This is the God of violence. When I speak of violence in a transcendent state, it can be, we can think of it as a dirty word or a word that is traumatic. But what we understand is that we grow past trauma. We grow past this traumatic state and become something bigger than what we were before. I started this off with a ritual that I did. I channeled a sigil in service to Santa Muerte, the goddess of death, the goddess of crossroads, the goddess who takes care of the undertrodden, based in Latin America, holy death. And it was done using a surgical tool that cauterizes wounds. Lucia Lowe, who's actually performing the sigilization on my back, she had a client, she's a dominatrix. She had a client who was a doctor, a surgeon that gave her this tool. I don't know if you can purchase these outside of that, but he gifted it to her. And we used it for a ritual branding. In this photograph, you can see the electrical current coming off and burning the sigil into my back. What was interesting is during that ceremony, I almost fell asleep. I was put into such a deep, transcendent calm that I nearly lost consciousness during the course of this. And that's what it ended up doing. So, my introduction to the spiritual world was somewhat of a traumatic one. At the age of 4, I woke up suddenly in my bedroom. I believed, my brother and I slept in the same bed. I believed my brother had rolled over on top of my head and was suffocating me. I thought I was going to die. I thought I was choking to death. And while I was struggling, and all I could see is darkness, while I was struggling, I was able to open my eyes. I realized that hadn't happened. He was actually a bit away from me. And I looked up towards the top of the bedroom door, and there was a black ball of energy floating and shifting about 6, 7, 8 feet, about 2 meters, I guess you could say here, above the bedroom door. And faces, both ugly and beautiful, some I knew, of family, some I didn't know, some in pain, some in struggle, some in agony, were rising and falling within this ball. And then I lost consciousness. I grew up in an incredibly, what some would call, very haunted house. I encountered these types of spirits often in my youth, and it was oftentimes a terrifying experience. But I bring that up because it introduced me to a world of terror within the realm of spirituality and experience. And not that adjusted my palate, so to speak, but it definitely prepared it to broaden it for the experiences that would come later as I evolve my practice. When, as a child, as a young adolescent, I was introduced to the world of the left-hand path and Satanism with the Satanic Rituals written by Anton LaVey. A lot of the work in there was done by Michael Aquino, the Temple set, but the introduction is what pulled me into this world that we're here now, that we're all kind of discussing and doing. And it's this, when you first open the book, it's the very first page. It says, on the altar of the devil, up is down, pleasure is pain, darkness is light, slavery is freedom, and madness is sanity. The Satanic Ritual Chamber is the ideal setting for the entertainment of unspoken thoughts, a veritable place of perversity. That, I think, is the proclamation of what we're looking at here. We're looking at that which causes a catalytic state of transformation that is not comfortable, that is not convenient, that triggers us and pushes us to evolve to another state. Just like that was said in the invocation last night. The hell to some, heaven to others. Or like in Hellraiser, demons to some, angels to others. Right? This idea that this discomfort can become a transcendent experience. You can turn something negative, catalytic. It's just like the death card in tarot, or the Ten of Swords. It's a horrifying thing to see when you're asking about, when you're trying to define an important set of events that are to come. You pull the Ten of Swords, it's this tragic experience, but it's telling you that there is going to hit a baseline that's going to catalyze and trigger transformative events, transformational events. That is the Ten of Swords, and that's what we're discussing here. So I kind of went into what could be the violent divine. It could be a literal, in a literal sense, physical event, or it could be a traumatic event, the moment your life changes, the moment you lose someone. If you look deep into nature itself, nature is not kind. You have Pompeii, you have Mount St. Helen, you have the hurricanes that have ravaged the American East Coast right now. You have all these, you have the lion that tears apart the gazelle, so on and so forth. Nature is not kind, necessarily compassionate. There is infinite beauty. There is the calm deep within a forest, or deep in an ocean, an impossible divine silence, where nothing becomes everything, becomes absolute. And you have the calm, and you have this kind of order, this chaotic order that seems to assert itself in nature, that is beautiful in its design, or lack of. But then you have incredible violence that seems to have no precedent. It doesn't seem to have an intention or purpose. It's an aimless violence. And so this experience, what that feeling that comes, that buzzing that comes during those times, I like to think of it as a deafening ring that occurs during these moments of trauma, both naturalistic or otherwise. I remember traveling through the Central California, deep in the Death Valley, and looking off into the distance and the horizon with the cracked earth beneath you, and the dried seabeds and lake beds. And it's an alien environment. You think how can it exist here on Earth and not exist? It looks other planetary. It looks alien. It looks strange. It's beautiful and it's unsettling. Phones without service, so if anything happens, you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's what they call extreme camping, right? But there's this beautiful silence, but it's also unsettling that anything could happen, or there's something that you don't quite understand. There's an immensity you don't quite understand to the moment. That I also call a violent divine. So what gods of violence do we have? I don't know if we have anything explicitly a god of violence. We have warrior gods. We have gods of aggression or competitiveness. We have gods of war, gods of vengeance. Ares, Nurgle, supernatural violence perhaps. Sekhmet, vengeance. Lilith, I prefer this Lilith over some of the other ones. Holding the miscarried child, the severed penis. This is the aspect of Lilith I think is more honest to the Zoharic representation of Lilith. Ogun, the devil, of course, the famous Codex Gigas devil. Athena, Kyrios, we won't think of the god of violence necessarily, but a lord of animals, a holder of the horned serpent, who holds open the gate of death and creation. Set, Yahweh, a lot of people have been sacrificed in the name of Yahweh in a violent way. Tyr and Fenrir, Satan in numbers. The very first occurrence of Satan as the angel Satan. We think of Satan the adversary, right? But the first appearance of Satan in the Old Testament is Satan, a Satan angel, was brought to prevent Balaam, the fortune teller, from giving his prophecy that would have affected the people of Israel. So a satanic angel, is an obstructor. But is this a God of violence? Christ with his whip, punishing the house of the gamblers. So we see there isn't. I want to extract outward from these things the idea of competitive, the idea of vengeance, the idea of strength, these different ways. What pulls back and unites all of them? What is this asserting energy that we're trying to identify that I described a bit ago? And I came up with a very simple Theosis, literally God of violence. And Midjourney helped with creating an image for the God of violence, which I actually like quite a bit. I didn't plan for this. I think that there's a figure in the background that kind of looks like Buddha. It's almost like a projection of peace. I didn't intend that at all. The roses, the halo of bloody roses, I thought were a beautiful touch. So there's something to this AI art, I think. The blooming kind of blood pendant on the heart. So I use Theosis to merely not explain not to necessarily create a God to worship, but to explain instead of necessarily thinking of a nameless God, to create a God that represents this aspects of transformation. An altar of violence might look like the one we have here. An altar to the God of violence. A reminder of life, death, transformation, pain. Of what makes us what we are. Right? So I'm going to talk about two aspects of a viatheotic state. So viatheos would be violence against God, literally, if we were to translate it etymologically. And I think this is important, committing violence against God, but God is oneself. So I identify two types of a viatheotic state, an internal viatheosis and external viatheosis. Internal viatheosis is, although it speaks internally, it's reliant upon situational conditioners, or environmental conditions. So I talked about the empty desert, that unsettled alien experience, being deep in a forest, deep off the map, what have you. That creates a feeling within oneself of that unsettled, transformational spiritual experience. External viatheosis is what we saw a bit last night. Body suspension, hook suspension, self-mutilation. I know that's a bad word, but we're here amongst like minds. The idea of creating that through external means. So either through bringing oneself to a physical catalytic state. Internal viatheosis. This is a cairn in northwest Ireland. You have to drive for quite some time to get off the map to get to it. It's a sacred state. And you feel a kind of palpable, there's a source of power there that reaches back thousands of years, where the names are gone, the intentions are gone. All you have left is a holy site. This is more to kind of capture these isolated places. This is a dried lake bed in the Mojave. Again, these places they're places I seek out in order to produce this state. So in the internal viatheotic state, this is when you take yourself to a raw, physical, natural environment, or it could be in a city. It could be in a dangerous or seedy part of the city that you find apprehensive, in order to produce a terror within oneself. Obviously, this has its risks, right? Obviously. But transformation is not comfortable. Transformation is not convenient. Alchemy is not comfortable. It is not in a state of convenience or comfort that we're able to find an alchemical transformation. It should not be comfortable. It should challenge you. It should make you question what you are and what you're capable of. So, in an internal viatheosis, you're taking yourself to a place where help isn't immediate, where you have to engross yourself in the environment around you. This is a rite performed in this is a cave in it's about an hour or two outside Los Angeles. crawled up to get to this cave. It's where we did a catabasis ritual or crossroads rite to conjure the old one. This is in Balinistu Woods. This is about 2 hours outside Dublin. Also a ritual to conjure Cernunnos. This is at a point, again, the locations of these places was chosen in order to separate from not just onlookers or anything like that, but to go off the grid. And I noticed deep within these woods here, even though it was broad daylight, maybe 2, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, under these trees it's absolute darkness. Absolute darkness. It almost brings, in the woods of Ireland, it almost brings it makes sense, the mythology of Fae, and the mythology of these various demonic entities and things like that. The original Fae are vicious. Diane Narroway would explain that to us, that the Fae are not these nice little angelic little creatures that we see with Disney, right? They take your children and your children come back as weird creatures. This is in the Mojave Desert. This is far off the grid. We were here for about 2 days to enact one of the rituals within the Primorium Variant, to conjure Lucifuge Roficale. So it was a Solomonic rite, but it was chosen in order to bring us within that in-between state that I'm discussing here. Anton LaVey wrote a ritual, an infamous one, that teaches you how to become a werewolf. And it's similar to some of the ideas I'm explaining here. What he describes is the idea of a haunting is a physical place that is gained in consciousness that senses your terror, senses your apprehension, and calls you back to it. So he says, in order to become a lycanthrope, the lycanthropic process, to become a werewolf, you find a place that brings terror to your mind, and you go to this place, but before you reach a climax of experience, you leave for a few days. You let it call back to you so that there's a negotiation between you and the location. And then when the time is right, you come back to this place, and you'll notice yourself enter this transformative, animalistic, primitive type state of mind. So I bring that up because it relates directly kind of to what I'm discussing about the viatheotic state. External viatheosis. So what I want to close off with the internal viatheotic state is that when you undergo this experience, and what we're going to go into now is going to go into physical viatheosis or external viatheosis, is when you're in it, you immerse yourself in it. What does that fear or apprehension or unsettled feel like? When you close your eyes, does it have a color? Does it have a sensation? Is it in your chest? Is it in your crown? Do you feel it elsewhere in your body? Is it outside of yourself, or does it come within yourself? Does it well up? What color is it? Some of us see energy as blue or pink or red or green, right? So when you're undergoing a viatheotic transformation, when you're trying to utilize this energy for magical intention, you can become familiar with these feelings. And what happens is, you'll notice that fear, that point of fear, or that trepidation, or that apprehension, will then transform into a sense of accomplishment or pride. Not only do I not feel fear, I feel empowerment from undergoing this challenge and overcoming it. That then produces, a change, and you can then see this energy well within you. This is Shia Muslims, a sect of Shia Muslims practicing self-flagellation and self-mutilation as part of the month of Muharram and the Ashura, the 10th day. It's mourning of the grandson, the murder of the grandson of Muhammad. And so as part of that mourning, they self-flagellate. And this is an image of a man slamming a sword into his forehead to produce that. Also using flail, razor blades. This is the same Shia Muslim sect. This is still practiced today, although it's frowned upon, very much so. It's seen as a pagan practice by a lot of Islamic imams, and that makes sense because it is. These are Filipino Catholic penitents who, in the Holy Week, in Lent, are self-flagellating using wooden flails in order to seek forgiveness for their sins. I particularly like this image. This came during isolation in 2020, during the lockdown. They were still trying to practice this in isolation. This is Lucia Lowe. This is a ritual partner and friend I've known for many years. A lot of the images I've shown in a lot of ritual work. I like to flow these right into each other, because they flow into each other in such a in such a cohesive way that it's both beautiful and unsettling. This is her performing a rite that she called the Rite of the Six Wounds. She saw from a satanic perspective, seeing Christ, the idea of the passion of Christ undergoing the flagellation and undergoing the physical trepidation as a necessary way to encounter the violent divine. This is the violent divine in action. So, well, why not? Can't we learn a lesson from this and integrate this into a satanic practice? Why not? A sadist can find a way to transcend in a faithful way, find a transcendent state through this in a similar way. And ironically, by re-envisioning the wounds of Christ, she had a flail with razor blades set up, and she ended up slicing open part of her abdomen, and she didn't go to the hospital for it. Luis Fleischauer was there. I think he's kind of stitched it up. But I think this is a representation of a transcendent, faithful experience. This is the Lucifer Rising ritual that I did using suspension. This is the second hook suspension I've done. It was far more painful than the first time. The first time was a lotus position, and it was peaceful. I could stay up there for days. This one, I got pale, and I had to come down after 4 minutes, and they gave me a sugar pill so I wouldn't pass out. But you can see me literally in the video just become pale, and I almost lose consciousness. But I was capturing the fall of man. This is in 2016. This is when the US was undergoing a political upheaval. And it was representing the Luciferic, the fall of man, as a necessary stage for us to reach a new aeon. We discussed last night us coming into an aeon. You don't come into an aeon with a comfortable aeon. No revolution is going to not come without sacrifice. And I wanted to embody that need in order to sacrifice that part of ourselves that has to be let go. If you look in the left-hand path and you look at demonolatry, and you look at the Kelopot or the Klipoth, the tree of death, you see that it speaks of us losing something so we can evolve. This is the Sakyant rite. This is when a sigil was carved in using the traditional Thai way, hammering a needle into our skin. I ended up having it done over by a tattoo artist, but this is a ritual I did with the author Jack Grail. I was conjuring Lucifuge Rafakala. He was using the traditional Catholic exorcism, but in the sense of exorcism as a Solomonic conjuring from the Heptameron, which is using the name of God to coerce a demon to do your will. While I was using a more, hey, this demon guy is cool, he's my friend, and where this is not someone to force to do anything. Let's get his consent first. Very modern, demonic, or left-hand pathway to do it. He was using a very traditional. And I used different ways to offer myself to Lucifuge Rafakali. Not only am I not asking you of anything, I'm giving myself to you. I was repeating spirit above body, a Gnostic invocation. Destroy my body to enhance my spirit. This was an offering to the demon Lucifuge Rafakali. And I think very similar to some of the previous images we just seen. This is an effort to give myself, to bring myself to a state to be worthy. This isn't to say that we aren't worthy. This is to say that we want to become more worthy of a transformative self. And this final set of images, what's the time? Time. This final image, and I'll close it here. External via Theosis is violence against something else. It's not a rabbit hole I'm going to go down. But animal sacrifice is a rogue religious practice, and some disagree on it, and some assert themselves to it. I remember I was in San Diego, and I met someone who was, they were Kimbanda, and at a cult store, and she's vegan. And I said, well, would you sacrifice an animal? Would you sacrifice a chicken? She said, in a heartbeat. So I think that highlights, I was actually vegetarian when I performed this animal sacrifice. It speaks to, it's also interesting because people might be offended in it, but then they go through a drive-thru at McDonald's and they get chicken nuggets, and then they say, well, why are you sacrificing the chicken? But I think this represents an aspect of reaching the divine through these means. And I think this is one of the most, and you can see it on our faces in this photograph, a kind of dissection from reality. That's not to say there's any regret to the experience, but it's to say that it's so heavy that it's an experience and a kind of burden of the divine in a sense that we see within ourselves that connection to the God of violence and what that means within us. And hopefully we can find a way to use that to understand ourselves and become greater than we were before the act. So thank you.